Your husband is not meant for you. Victoria, now known to everyone in the small Missouri town as Mrs. Williams, sat on an old wooden bench in her cozy yard. A light spring breeze played with the edges of her plaid blanket, and the gentle sun gently touched her wrinkled cheeks. She closed her eyes and inhaled the fresh air, remembering her youth. Somewhere nearby, the bells of the local church rang softly. Their deep, reverent sound announced the beginning of the evening service. Victoria stood up, crossed herself with a light step, and adjusting her favourite blue shawl, set off in the direction of the Baptist church on the main street. Look how devout she has become. The familiar voices of the neighbours were heard from time to time, following her every step. Do you remember what she was like in her youth? Victoria sometimes heard these words and silently clenched her fists, but did not allow herself to answer. Her steps quickened, and only after crossing the threshold of the church did she allow herself to wipe away her tears. It's true that they say that time flies like a whirlwind, she sighed softly, sinking into a pew in the back row. It seems like yesterday I was young, beautiful, and my whole life seemed ahead. And now? Today you get out of bed and immediately think, either your back hurts or your legs don't obey. Victoria's gaze was directed at the window, through which the tops of the trees could be seen. All that remained were memories. I was then studying at a medical college in Springfield, she began to recall, leaning forward a little, and once I met a new instructor in the corridor. Young, handsome, with white teeth, like a movie actor's, he immediately attracted my attention. I decided then, anything but he will be my husband. Katya, my roommate and best friend, could barely contain her laughter when she heard my intentions. Victoria, are you serious? She said, wiping away tears from laughter. But he already has a girlfriend and, by the way, they are getting married soon. So what? I answered stubbornly, folding my arms across my chest. Who said I would back down? I love him, and that is the main thing. Katya rolled her eyes and added, Victoria, just look at you. You are from a small farming town, and his girlfriend is an intern in a large hospital, almost a doctor. Can you beat her? I stamped my foot angrily. Let's see who will beat whom, I answered defiantly. My Stephen will be mine no matter what. However, Victoria understood that she, a young medical graduate, was too far from the world that Stephen belonged to. He was a professor, and she was an ordinary student, albeit a very capable one. And then I realized that I had to act, and act quickly, because the talk of his wedding was becoming more and more frequent, she recalls. I loved him, and I couldn't even imagine that he would kiss another woman, that he would marry her, that he would confess his love to her. The very thought of it made me sick. Of course, Victoria tried to start conversations with him, joked, but all her attempts were in vain. Every time she invited him for a walk or to the movies, Stephen only blushed and tactfully reminded her that she had to study the material for the next couple. Come on, stop this talk, he said, slamming his fist on the table. If you don't know, I'll tell you that I'm getting married soon. So I don't hear anything from you anymore that isn't related to your studies. Fortunately, they were alone in his office at the time, and Victoria looked down, barely holding back tears. She swore that Stephen would definitely ask her for forgiveness for those words and, eventually, ask her to become his wife. So she began to act. And this was not just some petty manipulation. Victoria turned to many of the famous fortune-telling grandmothers in the city until one of them agreed to help. You need to pour this into the drink that he drinks, she said, handing Victoria a small vial of liquid. And if something goes wrong in life, you know what to do. But think carefully about whether you really need him. And how much you need him, Victoria exclaimed, feeling her heart fill with hope. You have no idea how much I love him. And the very next day, after Stephen drank the treat from Victoria's hands while preparing for the state exams, he began to look at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. And then even more happened. walks in the park, trips to a cafe with flavoured ice cream, a movie, and, finally, the first kiss, when he saw her home. "Victoria, I love you," he said, looking at her with eyes full of feelings. These words, which she had been waiting for so long, literally lifted her from her seat, as if a fever had seized her. "And I propose, I ask you to become my wife. Do you agree?" A month later they got married and immediately went to Victoria's native village. Before the wedding, Stephen's fiancée came to me and she begged me not to marry him, Valentina recalls, her voice trembling with pain. She said she was pregnant and that after such shame she had no choice but to go to the grave or into the water. Victoria's eyes fill with tears. She holds her breath, saying that these memories still hurt. I should have stopped then, thought about what I was. But no, I was confident in my actions and the fortune teller's words. I thought I was doing everything right. At first, everything was wonderful. Stephen carried me in his arms, spoiled me with expensive clothes, jewellery, took me to the sea every summer. But then something began to change. She sighs again, remembering those moments. When he would sit down, stare at one point and say nothing for hours. I got creepy. Then he started disappearing fishing, sometimes for whole days and nights. He became irritable. Once he said that I couldn't make him happy, but he couldn't do it without me either. Victoria closes her eyes as if trying to forget those moments. And then, the worst happened. When he found out that the girl he wanted to marry had committed suicide, he got so drunk that they brought him home. After that, he rarely drank, but when he did, he turned into a beast. He would rush around the house, unable to find a place for himself. A shadow of sadness appears on her face again. I kept hoping that we would have a child soon, and that he would change, but the pregnancy still didn't come. The doctors said that he and I were both healthy and advised us to wait. I lost faith in their words and began to seek advice from witch doctors and fortune tellers. They promised and promised, took money, but the stork always bypassed our home. Victoria gets up, her face filled with bitterness and inexpressible longing. She recalls again the promises that once struck her hope. When I turned 35, I went to a sanatorium where I started an affair with a fellow vacationer. I thought that since he had 4 children of his own, he would make me happy too. He did. But in fact, he gave me a venereal disease. I wanted a child so much that I was ready to give everything, so I continued to seek advice from witch doctors. And Stephen kept talking about his son, what to name him, how to spend time with him, how they would go fishing together. However, over the years, we lost faith more and more. Time was not on my side. I was 45 when I went on a tour of the monastery. They showed us some caves where monks used to pray. And suddenly an old monk came up to me. "Your soul is restless," he said, looking at me kindly and sadly at the same time. "Your husband was not destined for you, and you took him and made 4 people unhappy. That girl who ended her life while pregnant, yourself, your husband who is nearby, and the man you were supposed to marry. You would have been happy with him. We would have had children. Nothing happens by chance. Everything is God's will, and everyone has their own cross, their own destiny. You decided to go against the will of the Lord and punished yourself. You yourself created your troubles with your desires and selfishness. Perhaps if you had relied on God's will, everything would have happened as it should. Pray now for forgiveness, for the fortune-telling, for the death of that pregnant girl who is also on your conscience, and for your husband's drunkenness." He left, and I was stunned. Then I was told that this elder was a seer, one to whom all the secrets of the human soul were revealed. When I returned home, I started going to church. There I felt better, lighter. Stephen has been gone for over 10 years, and at every service I ask God for forgiveness for my sins. After all, If it weren't for my infatuation, selfishness, and desire to get whatever I wanted, his life would be different. Mine too. That elder was not mistaken. I could have been happy with the one who was destined for me by fate. We would have had children, and maybe grandchildren. And so all that remained was repentance and daily prayer for the Lord to forgive. And I also want to warn young girls, don't do stupid things, because everything, both good and evil, comes back to us. True, we don't know when and from which side,